Before starring as Private Eye Gay Perry in Shane Black's neo-noir directorial debut Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Val Kilmer would do his own sleuthing in the directorial debut of DJ Caruso, known for such films like Disturbia and I Am Number 4. Tony Gayton, USC Film School graduate and director of the critically acclaimed 1987 music documentary Athens, Georgia Inside Out, wrote the script as an experimental sample to find work, alongside penning Murder by Numbers in the same year, with both films produced by Castle Rock Entertainment. So the film opens with the Batman Forever actor doing his best Chet Baker impression in the midst of a burning building full of money. The white jazz trumpeter sets himself as an unreliable narrator, going either by Tom Van Allen or Danny Parker. Possible schizophrenia aside, we flash back as Chet Baker gives us a brief history lesson on speed, from his Japanese origins before World War II to his alleged use by kamikaze pilots, 1950s housewives, JFK and bikers, to the contemporary methamphetamine dealers and addicts, ending the scene with another incendiary incident. But from meth mayhem to meth mecca, we get a glimpse of the user losers enjoying another day in paradise as the camera tracks on the degenerates, including Mr. Numbers over here, best known for getting his ass kicked in Dazed and Confused, but later redeeming himself by getting Ethan Hawke's sloppy seconds. But keeping in line with the chemical romance, we meet our less inflammable hero as the camera closes in on Iceman's midlife crisis back tattoo of the Grim Reaper overlooking the Salton Sea.
We have a title! Yes!
Which can also be seen in the poster, by the way. Symbolism aside, Danny Boy or Tommy Boy inner monologues his meth poetry jam session as we're introduced to Rachel Dawes 2.0's husband, playing a mullet-headed meth head named Jimmy the Finn, one of those ethnic nicknames like Nick the Greek, Old Sweet Anderson, Chinese Gordon, and French Montana to name a few. Anyway, Jimmy and the junkies run out of gag, and Finn the Fiend and his friend rush to the rescue to satiate their need.
The need for speed.
And the man who could provide such a service is a brother named Bobby, played by OG Bobby Johnson from South Central. So OG Bobby Junkie tweaks out in his drawers while having a Caucasian female sandwich in his mattress as Maya Rudolph's late mother ironically sings her 1974 hit song Loving You. Bobby's interracial bedroom habits becomes an even greater cause of alarm as the madness escalates into a matter of life and meth as the white boys are held at spirit gunpoint. The adult addict is prepared to go all tweaker from the Black Lagoon on his potential customers, but the more rational users talk some sense into the paranoid pusher, and the two go on their merry way to waste another day. So the Prince of Egypt, the Brokeback Brother-in-Law, the Hebrew Hammer, and the rest of the waste boys get back in action as they get as high as the heavens. But after coming down like Icarus, Tom or Danny reaches a payphone and contacts a couple of LAPD cops by the name of Morgan and Garcetti, respectively played by Percy from the Green Mile, who famously ruined his career by marrying a 16-year-old at 50, and Anthony LaPaglia, an Australian actor frequently cast as cops, then even his own brother Jonathan got in on the act. But the case on Bobby reaches a literal dead end, as the speed freak is found lying on the asphalt with his wife and daughter witnessing the family tragedy. Yeah, that guy was someone's husband and father.
What a waste.
The guilt-ridden Fink leaves the sorry sight and flees to his Fleabag apartment as he meets his next-door neighbor Colette, played by Canadian actress Deborah Kara Unger, who starred alongside several Oscar winners like Michael Douglas, Denzel Washington, and Mel Gibson to name a few. The neighbors chat like any good neighbor, but not for long as Colette expeditiously slams the door in Danny's face.
Bitch.
Bitchy neighbors aside, our hero washes up as Danny Parker, but walks out as Tom Van Allen, the trumpet-playing jazzman who had a wife as he reminisces about their time in the Salton Sea, which was significant enough to get ink that we'll get into later. But as for now, Tom retreats back into his Danny Parker alter ego as he meets Morgan and Garcetti in their church. The cops informs the informant that a Mexican gangbanger he put away named Domingo vows vengeance via Columbia necktie, which is mostly an urban legend with no verifiable evidence of ever occurring in America. Afraid of going out the Nicole Brown route, Parker once witnessed protection for all his work as a rat. But LA's finest says his felony's been reduced to a misdemeanor and that Danny's snitching privileges has expired, rendering the meth head as good as dead.
You lost all your LA privileges.
Since the law can't protect nor serve, the exiled tweaker exercises his Second Amendment rights through a young black gun runner and probably one of the best black market arms dealing scenes ever captured on screen. His appearance is more brief than Easy Annie and Taxi Driver, but the streetwise salesman packs an indelible impression in the first of many memorable moments. Meanwhile, legendary Puerto Rican actor Luis Guzman makes an appearance as Quincy as he raps on next-door neighbors Colette's door to no avail, while we later learn that a recently strapped Danny purchased a Smith 357 Magnum revolver along with a bulletproof vest.
Protect yourself at all times.
Later, Danny briefly visits his dead wife's grave until an Asian guy named Bubba comes rolling by, unrecognizably played by FBI psychiatrist Dr. George Wong from Law & Order SVU. Anyway, their mysterious encounter is kept rather oblique as Jimmy the Fiend and Danny discuss Pooh Bear. No, not the beloved A.A. Milne character from classic children's literature, but more of the perversely murderous variety from that cinematic abortion, as this Pooh Bear is a junkie drug dealer out in Palmdale, California, whom Danny wants to do business with to score a huge payday. But before the two can reach the compound, Jimmy tells Danny that Pooh Bear is a sleep-deprived pusher who lost his nose.
Got your nose.
Not in a gunfight like Lee Marvin's Oscar-winning dual role in Cat Ballou, but by snorting too much meth, a trait that happened through years of degenerative drug abuse, as comedian Artie Lang, for example. Anyway, the binging buddies touch down at the compound and meet Pooh Bear, played by Private Pal from Full Metal Jacket. But instead of being a dim-witted pariah, Pooh Bear is a somewhat popular history buff as he directs a mock reenactment on that 1963 Dallas tragedy using pigeons, another JFK reference starting with his massive pill popping and ending with getting popped off in some motorcade madness.
That's shooting.
The Bird Brain assassination dramatization baffles his guests for different reasons before Danny sits down to arrange a drug deal. But the avant-garde filmmaker's nonchalant attitude gives Danny some reticence as he calls him out on his cavalier behavior. Oliver, stoned, reacts by suspecting that Danny might be swindling him as he gives a stern warning on the last person who tried to rook him, sharing grisly details about the victim's brains and how he has an appetite the likes of Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Though this tidbit terrifies Danny, they reach an agreement as we'll later learn that Pooh Bear's Jeffrey Dahmer diet was all in jest.
Got him! Got him!
And apparently Jimmy never heard of President John F. Kennedy.
Are you on drugs, or is this your naturally moronic self?
While returning to his apartment, we learn more about Danny's next-door neighbor Colette and her relationship with Quincy, who happens to be her abusive sugar daddy Papu who basically owns Colette and has power over her daughter staying with grandma.
Fucked up.
But not as much as Morgan and Garcetti proving to be a pair of corrupt cops, as they beat the brakes off Danny for leaving them out on the loop on Pooh Bear's big drug score. Danny vows to renege on the deal with the meth kingpin, but the crooked cops force their CI to inform on his business partner like the snitch that he is, or else face federal prosecution. So Danny acquiesces with the dirty cops while in an attempt to go home safe and sound. But Danny faces another potential threat as an enigmatic driver with tinted windows stalks his whereabouts. Could it be one of Domingo's boys?
Oh, hell no!
Because in actuality, the driver turns out to be a 57-year-old third grade teacher who happens to be Danny's grieving Christian mother-in-law checking up on him out of fear of the path he's chosen. Oh, and Sergeant Hartman makes another Full Metal Jacket appearance as Danny's father-in-law. Anyway, Danny tells his mother-in-law to fall back as he's in league with some pretty nefarious characters, criminals and cops alike. And Pooh Bear, according to one of the criminal cops, is as devious as it gets as it's revealed he's an ex-con named Hollandale Monty, a killer who knocks off his business partners and steals their loot. Aware of what he's getting himself into, Danny reaches the 100-acre hood for a second time as he's escorted by Big Bill and Little Bill for a lucrative drug transaction. But before they can make a deal, Mr. Bear has suspicions that Danny is either 5 or a rat and asks him to drop trowel, which impresses Pooh to his homoerotic delight.
That is correct.
But the striptease has more sinister motives than any latent titillation, as Danny's tallywhacker runs afoul with a badger. So either Danny can tell the truth, or risk being feminized by a mustard. But instead of being honest about himself, Danny does what he does best as he snitches on Little Bill skimming the $10,000 owed to Pooh Bear.
Backstabber!
Mr. Bear closes the lid on the castrating badger and investigates Danny's claim, finding 10 racks in Little Bill's pocket.
Ay, caramba!
And in the background, we hear Machete experiencing some genital mutilation, which would have been a more fitting end for Johnny 23.
Johnny 600 if they knew the truth.
Danny leaves with his life and huevos intact and finds himself with his kindred retrograde neighbor Colette once more. They'd embrace, but Danny recoils from a future with another woman as he recalls his traumatic past at the Salton Sea. One evening out with his wife Liz, they stop at an inn asking for directions before hubby retires to the loo. But as Danny takes a whiz, The bullets start whizzing by as two ski mask killers spray the place with lead, wounding our hero in the process. The lovers are hidden away from the trigger-happy hitman, but it's Liz who makes the fatal flaw of alarming one of the shooters. And it's at this moment Danny's racked with survivor's guilt, as he had a choice to either sacrifice himself and save his wife, or watch her die and feel like a coward.
Some people might say you a bitch.
Biatch or not, Danny tries atoning for his past as he recommends Morgan and Garcetti to handle Colette's violent douchebag Boppy. The battered single mom hesitates framing Quincy, but later acquiesces as he's arrested on drug charges.
Bye, have a beautiful time.
But Quincy is just the tip of the iceberg, as Morgan and Garcetti conduct a sting operation on Bubba, the Henry Cho wannabe who's alleged to be a cop-killing drug trafficker.
Oh my God!
But in a twist, Bubba turns out to be a Fed just like his SVU character. It's also revealed that Tom Van Allen is his real name and that Danny Parker is his undercover alter ego. Furthermore, the Salton Sea crime scene was actually a front for a meth lab that the shooters ripped off. So Van Allen did his own private investigation, connecting the clues of red hair found at the crime scene, a gender scene in the area prior to the attack, a Central Valley classroom to gender war, and tracking the gender net to his alma mater as well as his job at the LA Sheriff's Department, which I guess you can say makes Tom a real genius.
Bingo!
But instead of jumping to conclusions, Tom has to bide his time for more proof and set the trap for a major buyer that Morgan and Garcetti can rip off. Enter Hollandale Monty, aka Pooh Bear, who could have went by the moniker of Dutch like Henry Holland in the Lavender Hill Mob, or Detective Holland Wagenbach in The Shield. But I guess Winnie the Pooh is a basic enough reference for any junkie to comprehend. Anyway, the faux hawk Fed has a proposition for his mullet meth head mate, but the conversation is sidetracked as Jimmy shows Tom a Danny Parker tattoo on his arm.
What are you, gay?
But Tom breaks his boyfriend's heart by telling Jimmy he's been living a lie the whole time and that he wants to go straight, as in sober.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
This development breaks silly gay Cyrus's achy breaky heart, but Tom lets him down easily as they remain cordial towards one another before heading out. The FBI, who plans on raiding Pooh Bear's estate, tells Tom to a motel for a meeting, but the G-Men's operation would get a rude awakening.
I'm not Tommy!
So Tom rides solo to the 100-acre hood and gets frisked as he drops his end of the bargain as the heat lurks around the corner. Big Bill would sneak away to the John during a card game, as Van Allen has an ace up his sleeve pretending to be a klutz, spilling booze over one of the guys at Pooh Corner and taking his seat. But underneath the table, he finds a revolver he taped below in an earlier scene for such a betrayal.
You smart.
Pooh Bear calls out for Big Bill in an obvious tell, as a conspicuous hitman ambles towards Tom in a game called Hole in the Head.
Yeah.
The world's worst assassin misses, of course, and Killer Kilmer has a draw on the cornrowed clown and two other guys like he was back in Tombstone.
I'm your huckleberry.
Pooh Bear tries rectifying his criminal intent, but ends up pulling a cheddar bob and catching on fire.
What is your major malfunction, numbnuts?
Pooh Bear extinguishes the self-inflicted flame.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
Tom watches over him in utter bewilderment, but Smokey the cheddar bear gives Tom all the smoke that his hired gun couldn't, pumping 5 rounds of lead into him at point-blank range.
This is the end, beautiful friend.
The last man barely standing hobbles his way from the massacre for one of the bare necessities as he takes a fix to numb the pain. But it won't last long as Morgan and Garcetti get into character and enter the danger zone. Upon their discovery, they find a presumably dead Tom on the ground lying among his would-be killers.
He's dead.
And very soon to join the departed will be Hollandale Monty.
Hole in the head.
With the crank kingpin gone, the crooked cops hit the jackpot and plan for a getaway. But Tom rises from the dead, revealing the bulletproof vest he purchased earlier.
You a genius.
The widower recalls that fateful night on the Salton Sea, or rather imagines an alternate scenario where his late wife forgives him shortly before her demise, giving him the closure and courage to avenge her ghost. And so Tom does, pulling a 187 on the undercover op.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Garcetti's dead like Zed and Morgan is next, but before Tom can send him down the Green Mile, the bereaved husband monologues to his wife's killer about his tragic past and true identity. He wants to hear Morgan's remorse before shuffling him from this mortal coil, but this only gives the unrepentant ginger nut job ample time to attack.
When you have to shoot, don't talk.
The unapologetic redhead now has a toaster in hand and insults Tom as a punk and coward after hearing his sob story. With all the excitement, Tom mulls over the capacity of the revolver like Dirty Harry and ultimately accepts his fate. But as destiny will have it, the lucky number is 8.
You lucky bastard.
The vigilante snatches Pooh Bear's syringe and gives Morgan a dose of his own medicine.
Your disease, and I'm the cure.
Meanwhile, Tom goes for Garcetti's gun and contemplates the Travis Bickle route. But self-deleting like Private Powell would only prove Morgan right about being weak, as well as disgracing the memory of his late wife. So like Renton and Trainspotting, Tom chooses life. His life, that is, as he repeatedly pulls the trigger on the killer until the pistol goes click.
Jesus.
After closing that cathartic chapter, we're back to the beginning as Tom returns to his white jazz persona with soliloquy and trumpet in hand. But after quenching his revenge, Tom would find himself on the receiving end of a rat and vendetta in the form of Colette and Quincy respectively. Apparently, Quincy is a Mexican gangbanger with ties to convicted gang member Domingo, who swore vengeance on Danny Parker for ratting him out, which makes perfect sense knowing he's the only other prominent Latino cast. As for Colette, she was given the Beach by Dre treatment and confessed out of the sake of her daughter. So, the Mexicali miscreant and the snitch bitch leave the vulnerable vigilante to burn like the original Wicker Man, or whatever the hell Ari Aster was trying for in Midsommar.
What the fuck?
Nearly engulfed in flames like the tattoos on his left arm, a gut-shot wounded Tom finds himself a guardian angel through his druggie buddy Jimmy the Finn. Moby's mesmerizing mood piece, My Weakness, plays as the protagonist sheds both personas, the undercover addict Danny Parker and the mourning widower Tom Van Allen. Recovering from a gunshot, drugs, and his wife's murder, the musician who looked more like a has-been rocker begins his new journey on the road to redemption and walks off into the sunset. And that's it. It's over. Released the same day as flops like Jason X or Life or something like it, this fared the worst, grossing only $1 million at the box office on an $18 million budget, and this was due to the fact that Warner Brothers were uncomfortable with a wide release, considering its significant drug content and Kennedy assassination sequence. The studio wanted an edited version instead, but the scenes remained and the picture was given a limited theatrical release of only 30 theaters. Despite this commercial failure, this is easily one of Kilmer's best leading roles of the aughts next to his role in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, another nifty neo-noir that bombed at the box office. And this film stands as one of the better 2002 neo-noirs, next to Christopher Nolan's Insomnia and Joe Carnahan's Narc. Described as Tarantino-esque by some critics, I can actually see a few similarities. It has offbeat LA lowlife characters, stylized visuals, sardonic humor, and non-linear storytelling like Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, but even with Quentin's latter revenge films, he's never delved to the depths of a sobering story with as many twists, or explored the lurid world of drug addiction that can be seen in methamphetamine-themed narratives like Spun or Breaking Bad, and this takes the best elements out of both of those aforementioned works, with enough thrills and suspense to engage its audience. As for the acting, Val Kilmer incredibly balances pathos and wit like Jeff Bridges in The Fisher King. Vincent D'Onofrio effectively mixes madcap and menace in perhaps his most oddball performance since Men in Black. Doug Hutchison is just as perfectly snide and sniveling as Gus Morgan as he was as Percy Wetmore. Anthony LaPaglia as Al Garcetti plays bad cop with all the gravitas of dirty cop Mike Brennan and Sidney Lumet's Q&A. B.D. Wong impressively goes against type as a staid and stoic Asian for a more unique aesthetic. And Peter Sarsgaard's addict character is affecting as he plays one of the more sympathetic junkies like Ryan Gosling and Half Nelson, which is a huge contrast from the scuzzy dirtbag character in Black Mass. But in spite of all this praise, the movie isn't without its flaws. My biggest nitpick, bigger than Tom murdering a couple of cops and lying to a federal agent, is Kudo's heist sequence. Perhaps it's supposed to distract us from the serious nature of the film for some meth mania, but the whole sequence is a superfluous waste of time that should have been on the cutting room floor. The only other addict who probably needed more characterization is Jimmy the Finn, to be honest. The rest of the speed freaks are irrelevant, and the only saving grace of the scene is a random old guy singing Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side. But overall, the movie has its redeeming qualities. For example, my favorite scene is from Info Coajo, credited as kids selling guns. Neither of them can get a word in as the erudite hustler sells his merchandise better than Gordon Gekko, Jordan Belfort, Grant Cardone, or Tyler Perry. He's slick, smart, efficient, and one of the most captivating minor characters, leaving an impact like Winston Wolfe or Jesus Quintana. As for my favorite line, it'd have to be this.
Excuse me. I don't mean to impose, but I am the ocean.
It's such an amazingly bizarre line that sticks with you like other nonsensical ramblings that's heard in films like Bug, the hospital, the element of crime, and again the wrath of God. But altogether, I recommend watching this crime gem. It's a deceptively riveting yarn that begins as a tale about addiction, but cleverly evolves into a detective story about loss and redemption. If you're interested in other vigilante films about widowers seeking revenge on their wife's killers, I'd suggest you watch Christopher Nolan's Memento, Ji-Woon Kim's I Saw the Devil, and Lee Winnell's Upgrade. Well, that about does it for me.